All right, welcome everybody. My name is Brandon Crumsey and I am the UGA Extension Clayton County Ag Agent. And tonight we're talking about one of my favorite subjects. We are talking composting. So this is all about composting and all about changing your food waste into garden treasure. So first off, I'm going to start off with a poll to see how much you all know about composting. So you should see it on your screen. So if you can just answer those questions for me. And then at the end of this program, I'm going to have an evaluation poll for you to fill out as well. But as I'm going through, I'm going to be talking about a lot of stuff, but I will definitely make sure I answer everyone's questions at the end. So I'm just going to give you a couple more minutes to fill out this poll right here. All right, so let's see what we got on the poll. All right, so the first question was, do you currently have a compost bin? So right now we're about 50-50 on that. How knowledgeable are you about composting? So again, 50-50, so most of you all know a little something about composting. And a lot of you think composting is fairly difficult. All right, well, I hope I change your mind on that. So I guess to break it down, this is the easiest way I think about composting is through cooking, right? So I have a bowl of this awesome, delicious meal that I love to eat all the time. Can anyone guess what this is? You can unmute yourselves or you can just type it in the chat.
Gumbo?
Yep. So some good, delicious New Orleans gumbo, right? So in gumbo, you usually have your sausage and your shrimp, onions, peppers, things like that. But the gumbo that I make and the gumbo that someone else makes, it's never going to be exactly the same, right? So we can all kind of use the same core ingredients, but it's not going to taste the same. It's not going to necessarily look the same, right? So that's kind of how I view compost, right? So compost, we're all using generally the same type of ingredients, but the process isn't going to be exact from my compost bin to your compost bin necessarily, right? So kind of theme of composting really is cooking. So this is kind of nature's gumbo in my opinion. So tonight we are going to talk about how can you make your own, kind of nature gumbo at home to meet the needs that you have for your landscape. So first question you got to ask when you're cooking, right, is what am I going to cook, or what's the definition of something? So what is compost? So all compost is basically the decomposed matter that you use in the process. So this is basically decomposed food waste, decomposed yard waste. And once all that stuff breaks down, it turns into this compost, which is a really rich decomposed material that you can use in your landscape. So the second question you got to ask is the why. So these are the three main reasons why you even want to compost or why you want to cook compost, right? So the first reason is you'll help reduce the waste that's going to your local landfill. So I believe the number is about 30% of the overall waste that we produce in our households can actually be composted. Second thing is you can use compost in your flower beds, in your vegetable garden, on your lawn. So it's really rich material. And, you know, as we can see from this picture, plants really love compost due to its nutrients, due to its composition. And then bagging, you can connect that to the landfill. So right now, you know, we're in fall, you know, we have our cooler weather, and we also have, you know, a ton of leaves starting to drop off trees, right? So when I drive around, I notice a lot of people actually bag up their leaves, right? So they're spending, you know, that Saturday morning raking up leaves and putting them in bags, and they're waiting for the trash truck to come by and take it away, right? Or, you know, some people may not be doing anything with their leaves at all, but really leaves are one of the best ingredients you can use to make compost. And, you know, leaves are free, right? Especially if you have a lot of trees in your yard, or, you know, your neighbor blows leaves out of their yard into your yard. They're really kind of doing you a favor, because they're basically saying, you know, hey, you know, compost these leaves. So just look at it that way. So those are the main reasons why. So here's a picture of some fall leaves out in the street. So this made me think about the neighbor who blows their leaves off their yard, right? So oftentimes leaves are basically all over our streets. They usually can clog up these drains. So remembering that leaves are a very key ingredient to great compost, right? Because they're going to break down into a really rich compost, and they're an awesome ingredient to use. So the 3 keys to good compost. So the first key is oxygen or air. So just like me and you need air to breathe, you know, compost needs oxygen and air so that it can break down things properly, right? So oftentimes when people have trouble with their compost, and we'll talk about this later, you know, it stinks or it's not breaking down, they're usually missing one of these 3 keys. So the second key is water. So again, like we need to drink water, you know, every day. The compost needs a good moisture level for all those living things inside of it. And then the third thing is particle size. So I saw this really cool yard device, you know, on one of those TV infomercials or whatever. This is called a Works Vac. So, and I'm sure they have plenty of different other products like it, but what it does is it's like a yard vacuum. So this will suck up all your leaves or vacuum your leaves, and it actually mulches the leaves through a blade, and then it puts those mulch leaves in this big bag. So why is that important? So when composting, particle size is important, because the smaller something is that can be composted, the quicker it'll break down. So, you know, a whole leaf is going to take a lot longer to break down than, you know, 100 small pieces of that leaf cut up already. So that's something to keep in mind as well. So since we work for UGA, you know, you have to kind of give praise to the bulldog, right? So this is the easy way to kind of remember what you should do with your compost. So, you know, you look at the paws of the mascot, right? So PAW stands for, the P and the S is particle size, A is for aeration, and W is for water. So when you're composting and you ever run into trouble, or you just don't think you're doing it right, you know, just stand out in your yard and, you know, put your paws up like this, think about the bulldog, and then just recite those things in your head, like which one of these keys am I kind of missing here that could really improve my compost? So again, you know, the P and S is for particle size, A is for aeration, W is for water. So then the third question we're thinking about, still, you know, we're still cooking our nature gumbo, is, so how are we going to do all this, right? We answered the what, the why, and now we're on the how. So basically, compost looks pretty simple on the outside, but there, you know, is a million different things going on that we just can't see. So I have this slide here, decomposition is more than meets the eye, because all these things you're seeing on this slide, all these things are going to be contained in your compost, because once you start, you know, introducing your food waste and your yard waste and things like that in your compost bin, that stuff's going to start to decompose, because all these different organisms. So the first group here is called chemical decomposers. So that's bacteria, protozoa, Actinomycetes, different funguses. So all these different microbial things that you can't see with the naked eye is actually doing a lot of work to break down those materials. So then you're also going to notice things you can actually see, your physical decomposers. So you might start noticing some earthworms, for example, or things like millipedes, sow bugs, and then black soldier flies. So actually in my compost bin, I'm pretty sure I have some of these because you'll often see these pretty much maggots in your compost bin. And if you have a ton in there, you'll actually be able to hear them, munching away on all that matter. So these are organisms that are really good for your compost because all they're doing is helping to accelerate that decomposition process, right? Because you want those things to break down and turn into rich compost. So then here is just a visual for you that shows all the different organisms that are involved in a compost pile. So, at the bottom here, we see kind of a pile of trash, right? Some leaves, some banana peels, things like that. But in reality, you have beetles and flies and bacteria and a ton of different things constantly working to break those things down. And these things are naturally going to occur just due to the materials that you use in your compost. But you will probably see this in a garden store. You'll see different products like compost makers or compost organisms, a ton of different names, and they're claiming that if you use their product, you're going to introduce a lot of beneficial bacteria and organisms into your compost. Well, to put it plainly, you don't need any of these products because just by simply putting a banana peel in there, putting a dead flower in there, putting leaves in there, all those materials already contain all the necessary bacteria and bugs and all that stuff. It already contains that, and it's already going to naturally occur. So you don't need to, buy any, magic compost products to make the process go faster. So now we got our what, why, and how. So now we got to realize, so what exactly are we going to put in this compost? So I guess just to go off the knowledge that you already have, just to see what you know. So we're going to play this quick kind of game real quick, use it or lose it. So this is a diseased tomato plant leaf. So if you think we should use this in our compost or lose it, you can, type it in the box, or you can just unmute yourself. All right, so most of y'all got it. Okay, well, half and half. All right, some people are saying lose it, some people are saying use it. So can anyone tell me why we should use this? What's your reasoning for us using it? And then what's your reasoning for us losing it? All right, Jamaica says you should use it because you should use everything. So why do you think we should lose it?
Diseased plant material.
Bingo. So yes, so in general, plant material is going to be one of the main ingredients that you use in the compost bin. But if you have diseased plant material like this tomato leaf, in general, you want to lose it. So you don't want to put this in your compost bin because there's still a possibility that that diseased organism can still live in that compost. Then when you, apply it to your garden and your flower bed, that disease can be transmitted to other different plants. So that's not 100% fact that it will be transmitted, but that's a risk that you take. So you don't, in general, you don't want to use any diseased plants in your compost. All right, so maybe someone had this for dinner tonight. You know, you got some KFC, some Popeyes, you got some fried chicken. It was delicious, and now you have some chicken left on the bone. You have some chicken bones. Can you put this in your compost? So are we using it or are we losing it? Yep. So most people are saying you lose it, right? So when composting, you definitely want to stay away from any meat products and anything that is real greasy. So, and the general precaution with that is once you start introducing products like that, you run a greater risk of attracting different unwanted animals like rats and raccoons and stuff like that. So in general, you want to stick to kind of plant material, food waste, yard waste, your fruits and vegetables, things like that. All right, so we have two things here actually. So we have egg yolks and then we have egg shells. So the egg yolks, are we using those or losing those?
Using.
Using.
Yep, egg shells we're using. What about the egg yolk?
Using.
Using.
Nope. So with the egg yolk, you want to lose those, right? So again, that's kind of back to the greasy type of food. So if you had some leftover eggs from breakfast, you just want to rinse those eggs out and then just leave the shells. And of course, you put the shells in the compost. All right, we have three things in this picture. So we have bread, we have peanut butter, and then we have peanuts. So the bread, what are we doing with the bread?
Use it.
Losing.
Bread, we can use bread. So things like bread, just plain rice with no butter or oil in it, pasta noodles, with no oil on it. So that type of stuff we can definitely use in the compost bin. What about the peanut butter?
That's tricky.
Yep.
Lose.
Yep. So you're losing the peanut butter, right? So Karen said too much oil. So yeah, peanut butter, you want to avoid that because it has the oil in it. And then what about our regular peanuts?
Use.
Yep. So you can use regular peanuts for sure. So yeah, y'all are getting the hang of this composting thing. All right, so cheese. What about cheese?
Lose it.
Lose it.
Dairy products.
Yep, so no dairy products. This falls in pretty much the same category as your meat products. So meat and dairy products, yogurt, cheese, whatever, you're definitely not using that in your compost. Coffee grounds.
Use it.
Yep, so coffee grounds make a great addition to your compost. Definitely good for the soil. They definitely break down easy. And this is the last one.
Use it.
Yep, so you can definitely use paper, newspaper, or shredded paper in your compost. So the only precaution with paper is if you use too much paper in relation to your other ingredients, it could start kind of matting together and not breaking down well enough. So you don't want to use more than about 10% or so of your compost. You don't want it to be a lot of paper, but you can definitely break down newspaper. All right, so here's a general guide that you can also use. So what's the recipe, right? So compost ingredients are broken down into two different categories. So you got your brown category, which is going to be, your fall leaves, straw, woody materials, like sawdust. And then your greens are going to be some grass clippings, food scraps, you know, banana peels, apples, moldy fruit and produce, and then some manures. So basically, you combine your brown and your greens together, combine that with water, air, and over time, that stuff's going to break down and turn into compost. So if you're ever kind of unsure of what to put in your compost, you know, think about the brown and the green category, and then think about our use it or lose it exercise to make sure you're putting in the right stuff. So ingredient composition. So this is gonna kind of show you, this basically tells you about how long it takes for things to break down. So wood has a very high carbon content versus food waste like, you know, spinach, apples, bananas, things like that. So wood products are gonna take longer to break down versus something like food waste or leaves or grass clippings. So that's why, that's just something to keep in mind when you're composting. So some other ingredients that you can use are grass clippings. If you have some extra grass clippings, you can throw that in there. You can use different fertilizers like blood meal or bone meal. You can use animal manure, but with animal manure, if you're putting that in your compost and say you're wanting to use that on your vegetable crops, you want to make sure that manure is decomposing for at least about 4 months. So, you know, if you put fresh raw manure on like a tomato plant or spinach, then, you know, you definitely run the risk of, you know, having dangerous bacteria on the food you're about to eat. So keeping that in mind. So some different structures that you can use. So there's two different processes really. So you can compost aerobically, which is using oxygen, and then you can compost anaerobically. So here are two easy ways you can start an aerobic composting process. So on the left, this is actually a picture of a trash can that I got. The trash can was probably, I don't know, $10 or so. So what I did was I got a drill and I just drilled holes all around the compost bin and on the top to help with the air circulation. And then all I did was I just put the different materials in the compost bin and I mixed it up. And, you know, if the lid is secure enough, you can even roll it around the yard. So this is a really cheap and simple way to start composting. And then if you want to get a little fancier, you know, you want to kind of brag about your composting hobby now, you can do the 3-chambered system on the right. So that basically is like an assembly line process. So you put your fresh materials in the first bin, you know, maybe you leave it there for 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whatever, you mix it up, then you move it to the second chamber. So then you put your fresh stuff in the first chamber, repeat, and then the stuff in the second chamber, you move to the third chamber. Then the third chamber should be the place where you have finished compost. So this way you're kind of have a constant assembly line of introducing composting piles. And then these are really cool. So these are compost tumblers. So I put a bunch up here because, you know, as you can see, the price pretty much varies from, you know, $75 to $200 to $300-400, just depending on the size and the brand. So these are really cool. So basically how these work, they're similar to the trash can, but they usually have chambers that you can close. You introduce the materials into them, and then you can turn or tumble them around to help with air circulation, help mix things up. And then when the compost is done, you can usually just dump it out into a bucket or on a pallet or a wheelbarrow. So these are some different ways that you can compost aerobically. And yeah, so I have a video here showing you basically how a compost tumbler works if you want to get one. So we can watch this.
Hi, I'm Mary Tone, one of the employee owners at Gardner Supply Company in Vermont. For 30 years, we've been designing products to help people grow more productive and healthy gardens. Adding compost to your garden is one of the best ways to improve your soil and ensure a healthy growing environment for your plants. Transforming kitchen scraps and yard waste into free, nutrient-rich compost just makes sense. A well-designed composter contains the mess and is the best way to produce high-quality compost. Over the years, we've tested dozens of compost bins, and when it comes to making compost quickly and easily, our exclusive dual batch compost tumbler is a winner. The key to its success is 2 rotating bins that let one batch cook while you add fresh scraps to the other. The tumbling action mixes ingredients and incorporates air, so organic materials break down into compost faster than they would in stationary bins. Each bin on the dual batch compost tumbler holds 3 cubic feet and has a sliding door. To use, begin filling the bin labeled Start with kitchen scraps, green grass clippings, and other fresh materials, alternating with some brown materials such as dried leaves or straw. A balance of fresh green materials and dried brown materials is essential for fast, odor-free composting. Continue to add materials until they are within about 10 inches of the top of the bin. Add water if needed to moisten the materials. Move the lid that says Finish to this bin. That way, you always know which bin to add materials to. Now it's time to let this batch cook. Spin the bin 5 to 10 times every 2 to 3 days to mix the ingredients and keep the compost cooking. While the first bin finishes, start filling the second bin with organic materials. In a matter of weeks, you can have finished compost. Just spin the Finish bin so the door is facing down and open it up. The dual batch compost tumbler is like having 2 composters in one. It's made of heavy-duty recycled polypropylene on a sturdy steel frame. It's a convenient and efficient way to transform kitchen scraps and yard waste into nutrient-rich compost for your garden.
Yep. So if you're interested in getting a compost tumbler, that's basically how it works. So it could be a pretty good investment for you. And then the last example I have is I saw this. So this person just simply used some straw bales to make kind of a pit in their yard, and they've just used the middle of the compost. So you can get very creative with how you kind of mix these materials for your compost as well. And then here's kind of how to prepare your ingredients kind of. So preparing the pile. So generally, you know, you definitely want to keep your pile kind of mixed up. And they kind of suggest that you layer your items to kind of ensure that everything is mixed up evenly. So it's kind of like, you know, baking a cake. You know, you got your flour and your butter and all that stuff. You know, you want everything to be mixed up well. So here we're seeing basically organic materials, your food waste, fertilizer, soil, things like that. And then, so this is an example of anaerobic composting. So this is actually composting in a black trash bag. So I believe the ingredient list for this is you use lime, food waste, fertilizer, a little bit of water. You mix it all up, you close the bag, and then you just keep it sealed for a certain amount of time, and then everything should break down into compost. So this is gonna take, you know, a lot longer than aerobic composting, just because the setup, but if you wanna, you know, try this in your garage or do an experiment, you can do that as well. So now we have all this information, you know, for our nature's gumbo. So now with cooking, for example, it may not be perfect before you serve it. So, you know, you always kind of got to check it, and you're probably going to run into some troubleshooting problems, right? You might need this or more of that. So same with compost. So you're definitely going to have to maintain your pile. So probably the most common problem you're going to face is it doesn't quite smell right. So in general, compost shouldn't stink. You shouldn't, you know, walk out your back door into your backyard. The first thing you smell is your compost bin. So if it smells that bad, then, you know, you're doing something wrong. So the solution to that is you either need to stir it up to introduce some more air into it to help with that decomposition, to help with that air circulation, or you need to add some more dry ingredients because chances are the compost is probably too wet. So these two solutions usually work pretty well for that problem. Another one is just not hot enough. So when compost is properly breaking down, you should be able to stick your hand, you know, at least in the center of it or on top of it, and you should be able to feel some heat coming off that compost. So, and the heat is just a sign that, you know, all those different physical decomposers, chemical decomposers, all those different things are working together and all that activity is generating that heat. So it should be hot. So if you don't feel it heating up, that means you need to help accelerate that activity. And you can simply do that by adding nitrogen or fertilizer or grass clippings, making sure you add air in there, adding water. So, you know, back to your pause formula. And yeah, in general, those are going to be your two main problems. So once you kind of reach the point where, you know, you've done all your troubleshooting, you got the right stuff, now your compost should be ready. So in general, compost should take about 30 days to break down. But if you're constantly, you know, introducing new things, you know, it's going to be a little longer. So how do we use compost? As a fertilizer. So compost isn't necessarily a fertilizer because it does contain nutrients, but not in a large amount. It contains a little bit of nutrients, so it's not enough to be used as a fertilizer. Can be used as a soil amendment for flowers, vegetables, things like that. Then you can definitely use it in potting soil, and you can incorporate compost with other potting soil mixes to help with drainage and nutrients, things like that. And then in summary, you know, compost is beneficial to the environment. It's simple work, a lot of complex things going on. And then, you know, of course, your ingredients are important. So your different plant matter, your food waste, things like that. So yeah, that's it. That's how you cook compost. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Oh, and let me put up this evaluation poll for you all as well. And I'll check the chat for any questions, or you can unmute yourselves. All right, so first question, I guess, is there any paper product you should not use? So for the paper products, pretty much the paper products you want to avoid are like the kind of shiny, glossy type paper. It's best to stick with just your kind of regular non-glossy paper, like your newspaper, for example, because that's going to break down easier. What about citrus? You can definitely use citrus. Cardboard. I mean, you could shred up cardboard to use in your compost, but you're probably better off using cardboard boxes kind of as a overall covering. So, so you can just lay it down on the ground as, you know, a folded up box, and then you can put the compost over it. So then that cardboard can act as a weed barrier, and then over time, the cardboard is naturally going to break down. So the cardboard will eventually be a part of that compost as well.
Yeah, I use cardboard. I let the cardboard flatten it out, kind of let it, make contact with the earth, and over a period of rains, it gets soft enough to just kind of easy to shred up and throw in the compost pile.
Yep. So yeah, if the cardboard gets real wet, you can easily tear it. So, you want to tear it into smaller pieces, you can put it in there, or you can just let it continue to break down on the ground naturally. And then another question, Karen said, what about grass that has been treated with herbicides? So grass that has been treated with herbicides, I guess with that, I would make sure I kind of read the label of, or find out what specific herbicide has been applied to that grass, and see if the label can tell you, a rough time period for when it is less active or when it starts to break down in the environment. But you can, I would probably have a waiting period with that grass before putting it in the compost. And then over time, of course, that grass is going to break down in that compost, and you can use it.
I got it.
Okay.
I got a question. My compost has been cooking since, I guess, late March or April. And I went ahead and turned it. And after I turned it, I got so many cardboard boxes or bags out of it. It appeared to be broken down real well. And then, of course, I had some left over. So now, am I starting all over again this fall? Or do I just add to what I already have?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So you got two options. So if you already have like a large container of finished compost, you could actually just choose to use, some of it, and then use the rest of that compost to kind of be a starter for your next composting process. So you can use some of it and then introduce your new ingredients to that old compost. And that's going to help things break down a lot quicker since it already has all those microorganisms in it. Or you can just start fresh, if you have another container, another area for composting.
Okay, thank you.
And then Nika Wood says she has a mesh wire compost bin. Does it need to be covered up in the winter? Oh, it snows a lot where I live. Yeah, you don't have to cover it up because in the wintertime in general, though, the compost process is going to be slower since it's colder outside. And, compost likes to be hot because the heat is what accelerates the process. But you don't have to cover up the bin to protect it from the cold because, it's still naturally going to break down. It's just going to take a lot longer in that colder environment. And where do you live where it snows a lot? You can just type that in the chat box. I'm just curious. And then, can you use cardboard? So you can. Another question, are the white flies, gnats a problem in a compost tumbler? So that's a good question. So your compost in general is going to attract flies and different insects, but if you have a bad fly problem with your compost, that means there's some exposed food waste in your compost. So that's, in that sense, you want to make sure you introduce like some leaves for probably the best thing, introduce some leaves, or you can actually use some finished compost or soil to cover up that food, help control the fly problem. How can you get rid of centipedes? So yeah, like I said, so the compost bin is going to attract a lot of insects just because of the different things in it. So you won't be able to get rid of any one insect without pretty much killing other insects. So I wouldn't worry too much about trying to get rid of centipedes or any other bugs because they're just naturally occurring. And the centipedes are probably helping with that composting process as well. Toilet tissue and paper towel rolls, okay. So yeah, So I would say if these are, of course, clean pieces of paper, or you just use like a paper towel to wipe up some water or something, you can definitely use those paper products in a compost bin, but definitely shouldn't use any used paper products in a compost bin unless you're in unless you have a more controlled composting process, like the composting toilets that that you can get, things like that. Onions, yes, you can definitely use onions. And wow, Nika is from Canada. Great, so welcome. Glad you tuned in. So Karen asked, should you try to add a lot of waste, leaves, paper all at once and then leave it alone, or does it typically take quite a while to fill the compost tumbler? So best thing to do is kind of add it slowly over time, or you could add, or if you have a compost tumbler, you could fill, let's say half of it with leaves and then introduce a lot of food waste to kind of mix in with those leaves, because you want to have, a good mixture of browns and greens in your compost, because if you have the right mixture of those things, it's going to break down a lot faster. And I think that was all the questions. Do we have any more questions? Oh. So can I build my wire mesh compost bin on a driveway surface area? I can't reach my backyard when it starts to snow. Yeah, so you can definitely leave your compost bin on the concrete. I guess I'm assuming driveway's concrete. And then, yeah, those materials contained in that bin are still going to break down for sure. All right, so my mom worries about leaves because they look diseased to her. How can we be sure the leaves we are putting in are safe? So with the fall leaves, like from oak trees and different trees like that, I wouldn't necessarily be too concerned about those, because in general, most of those leaves are gonna break down better than kind of a diseased tomato plant. But in general, with the diseased plants, you're mainly focusing on, things you have kind of more control over. So that could be, vegetable crops or flowers that have a lot of diseases. But with your fall leaves, I would just rake those up and throw them in there. But I wouldn't worry too much about a disease from those leaves, unless you just know for certain that this specific tree has a known disease. But in general, fall leaves are going to be the safest, best thing you can use every year. Yeah, for the mesh bin, you won't need a barrier unless you wanted to, put it on some type of platform so you can, more easily move it into your backyard when the time is right for that, or you want to help contain that compost better, but you don't necessarily need a barrier at the bottom of it. And yeah, so are marigold blossoms okay to compost? So yeah, all your old annual flowers that are starting to die right now due to cold weather, you can definitely use those. I just put some zinnias in my compost bin, so the whole plant will be fine with those. So do you recommend a sifter for the compost? So, well, that's a good question. So with compost, you can use a sifter if you want. That'd be kind of a long task if you want to sift through your compost. But if you want to have, finer material to use in your landscape, you can definitely use a sifter, because chances are you're going to have a few chunks in there of things that didn't compost, or things that are still just breaking down in general. But if you want to, a cleaner harvest of compost, you can definitely use a sifter for that. won't the chemical reaction while it's cooking actually change the composition of the plants, so it doesn't matter as much what goes in there? Yeah, so in general, with the composting process, so like I said earlier, you know, you want your compost to heat up. So if your compost starts to get really hot, starts to decompose really well, in general, that should kill off, that should kill off different diseases and organisms, things like that. But I only say try to avoid it in kind of this backyard setting, because the risk is kind of greater in our setting, because we're not, you know, using like professional tools and facilities to kind of cook our compost. So we're not like perfect at it. So I just said that just to kind of limit the risk. But in general, if everything is composting correctly, things are heating up, that should eliminate the disease problem. But, you know, just to be aware of the risk that it won't necessarily, you know, kill everything in a kind of a homeowner setting. Yep, ashes from fire pit. Yep, you can use that in your compost. Charcoal. Kerosene to start the fire. Yeah, with the charcoal, I probably wouldn't use the charcoal in my compost bin. I mean, yeah, because a lot of times, you know, you're probably putting lighter fluid on it, and, you know, some meat particles may fall off the grill onto it. So I wouldn't necessarily use charcoal in my compost, but, you know, ashes from, you know, a fireplace or something where you're just burning wood, yeah, I would put that in there. All right, so will I be doing a presentation on worm bins? I definitely can. I have done one in the past, but so yeah, so if anybody is interested in a copy of this presentation, you can email me at bcrumsey@uga.edu. I'm putting that in the chat. And then if you would like me to do a worm bin program, you know, just chime in on the chat, and I can schedule that for probably next month. And I'll put that on our Eventbrite page. And then you all can sign up. And you can also email me directly, you know, saying that you definitely want to sign up for a worm bin class. So again, my email is bcrumsey@uga.edu. So if you would like also a copy of this presentation, you would like more information about composting, you would like a link to the recording, just send me an email. But yeah, if we don't have any more questions, thank you everyone for attending tonight. Hope to see you on planting flowering bulbs next month on November 2nd. And looks like we'll be doing a worm composting program as well. So hope you all continue to sign up for our programs. Thank you everyone for attending tonight.